call the meeting to order. And we can start with a roll call of the Joint Review Board members.
Vernon Hills Park District.
Here.
Countryside Fire Protection District.
Here.
Libertyville Township.
Here.
Village of Vernon Hills.
Here.
Community member.
Here.
College of Lake County.
Present.
Libertyville High School.
Here.
Hawthorne Consolidated School District.
Here.
County of Lake.
Here.
Cook Memorial Library District.
Here.
And so just before we get started, I'm going to ask that all the members of the board use the raise hand button and wait to be recognized by the chair to speak, just so we're not speaking over each other. I feel like online it's just a little more difficult. I will try to take speakers in the order that their hands are raised, and certainly everybody will get a chance to speak if they so choose.
Okay, I'm not a rocket surgeon. Where do I find the raised hand button?
All right, if you click on participants, there should be a spot that says raise hand.
Okay, I'm good, thanks.
Okay.
I'm not seeing that. Where is that?
So if, like I said, if you click on participants at the bottom of the list, there's invite, mute me, raise hand.
Got it.
Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome. Like I said, I just want to keep from everybody talking over each other so we can be efficient. And so we can move on to the review and approval of the August 13, 2020 Joint Review Board minutes. Can I get a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Motion by Hawthorne 73. Is there a second?
Vernon Hills Park District.
Second by Vernon Hills Park District. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Vernon Hills Park District.
Yes.
Countryside Fire Protection District.
Yes.
Libertyville Township.
Abstain, I wasn't present.
Village of Vernon Hills.
Yes.
Community member.
Yes.
College of Lake County.
Yes.
Libertyville High School.
Yes.
And you want to vote for us?
Yes.
Hawthorne Consolidated School District.
Yes.
County of Lake.
Yes.
Cook Memorial Library District.
Yes.
Unanimous, motion passes. So we'll move on to public comment. Are there any members of the public on that wish to comment? I don't know if Mike can help out with that. I know that they're.
Yeah, Mike will have to let them in. Mike, if there's people that wish to comment, can you let them in one at a time, please? Mike, can you respond verbally if there's anyone wishing to comment?
I see Mike Shank.
Yeah, I brought a Mike Schenk in. He had his hand up as an attendee.
Yeah, so Mike, go ahead. If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah,
I can't hear him. He's not coming through.
Yeah, you know,
I gotta move here.
all right, I can hear you now, Mike.
Can I? You can hear me now? Okay, great. Okay. Should I? Can you just verify? You can hear me, right, Julie?
You're in and out, Mike. I don't know if you can get to a more stable location. You're very in and out. We can't really hear or understand you.
Yes.
So,
I'm working on it.
so maybe we can put Mike back on the outside and move on to somebody else and come back to Mr. Shank.
Yeah, okay, I'll get a better location.
Is there anybody else with their hand up, Mike?
There is not.
Okay, well, while we're waiting
How
for,
about now?
um,
Are we good?
I think so. You can try.
Okay. Okay, I'll just stay right here. Okay, so thank you for allowing public comment today. You know, I just want to let everybody know that, you know, I'm a little late to the party. I was with the whole TIF as it was presented, the Hawthorne Mall Development Plan last June, I think it was. I was under the understanding that the potential TIF was just going to kind of hit the areas that were not developed in the mall. And now that I see that the development is looking to get most of the area for the TIF, and I just want to let you guys know, I know it's early in the stages, the public forum is slated for October, but if it's going in its present form, as I found on the TIF qualification report on the village website, I can assure you there will be public opposition mobilizing. We want what's best for the community. We want what's best for the community, the village of Vernon Hills government, the schools, the park district, and the community themselves, and all the taxing bodies. We know TIFs are sometimes needed in times of need, but I do feel that this proposal is them shooting for the moon, and I feel that we need to keep them in the atmosphere, in orbit here, because we need to reel them back in, and I know all the taxing bodies on this call will be affected if that TIF, and the ones who will make out of the developer and the village with the sales tax revenue. But I look at some of this stuff as village assets, as a community, even though we don't own the property, the sales tax and the property tax revenue all plays part in building our community. And if you TIF that entire property along with Melody Farms that's already been TIFed, that's going to really hurt our taxing bodies. And at the end of the day, the community is going to have to absorb the increase in the taxes. Now, I know that the last couple of years, the village has been working with the school districts to help basically give more support. But I do think work needs to be done. So I'm not asking you to ask for a continuance on this, but I can tell you if we get to October, there will be opposition. And I do think all the trustees do need to hear everybody's opinion on this and do what's best for the community, not what's just best for the village government and the sales tax revenue. There is a middle ground here. And as we go forward, I will be involved, and there's a lot of us getting involved. Just want to let you guys all know that.
Thank you, Mike. And has anybody else joined in an attempt to make public comment, Mike?
No one else has joined.
Okay, so I was forwarded by Village Manager Fleshauer 2 public comments that were submitted. I don't know, Lynn, if you were planning to read those or if you guys want me to read them.
Lynn does not have copies of those. I forwarded them to you, and I also forwarded copies to each of the members of the board for your review so that you could enter them into the record.
Okay, I just opened them pretty much when I got on, so I haven't read them, but in the other meetings that I've participated in, they have been actually read into the record for the rest of the public to see them. So I will read them. The first one is from Diane Serino. Her comment says, I have lived in Vernon Hills for 20 years now, and I love it here. Great mix of shopping, lovely parks, trails. The school system is very good, and I'm grateful for the dual language program it offers. I know many parents who have moved into the community specifically for DL program. My family is a low-income family, as are many families in our community. So we are just getting by, and recent economic downfall due to COVID-19 epidemic, many of us are hurting drastically because of lost jobs, including myself. When I got my recent tax bill, I was outraged, a $900 increase. Granted, I live in a small townhome, but the increase for the families in Greg's Landings and other neighborhoods, they got increases in the thousands. Due to that, my mortgage went up $220 a month to cover the escrow shortage. Even before COVID, I can't afford that. And now you want to tax us even more. The school system is overwhelmed as it is, and by building hundreds of more housing units will put even more burden on the schools. As I found out that Melody Farms was also built using a TIF. Ridiculous. All those families putting kids into our schools, and the developers helped pay nothing of the burden. Everybody needs to pay their share of taxes no matter what. Rich people can't continue to put the burden on the poor. The mall is not old. It is not deteriorating, as you say. If you include Macy's and JCPenney, the mall will not empty. If you actually tried looking / advertising for big retailers to join the mall and not raise rental fees, you would find them. So stop lying to get this TIF approved. But when you wouldn't get your big payoff, this got approved, right? Everything in Vernon Hills is becoming so expensive. The housing, $1,600 for a studio, $2,300 for a 2-bedroom at Melody Farms is double what I pay for my townhouse. And the high-end retail grocery stores and all the expensive restaurants, it has become very hard to continue living here. Our school district is second highest taxed in the country. And if the TIF is passed, we will become first, because our school system will stand to lose millions of dollars per year of support in the future. And only way it will be able to get our support is through taxes paid by the people who are living in the community. And I've heard many people in this community who are contemplating whether they should stay here or move somewhere cheaper, us included. Do not pass this. There's an expletive that I won't say. You don't care about your community or your people. All you care about is how much money you can benefit from. Please don't let the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You can stop that by not approving this. And then there is another one sent by Alberta Mendoza. Hello, my name is Alberta Mendoza, and I live at 156 Webster Place, Vernon Hills. I would really like you to support the people that live in Vernon Hills. We all pay a lot of taxes and want you to support the community with not approving this TIF. It's the community's money that you would be taking from. You have given Melody Farms a big cut and now the mall. We need the village to be open and transparency with our schools. You should be working with us, not against us. All the money that this business give to the village can improve our community better and better our schools. You think what's better for the people and is actually right. No to TIF. And those were the two that were forwarded to me by the village manager.
I'm sorry, did Mark, did you say you emailed them out to the board? Because I don't think I got them.
I emailed them out. Yeah, I emailed them out about 1:35 this morning. The cutoff period, or this afternoon, the cutoff period was at 1:30. And I sent them to all the members of the Joint Review Board. Dan, it's possible that it went to Prentice because all the communication goes to, he's saying yes. It went to him and then he forwards that to you.
And that's probably what happened to me as well. I'll ask Pete then. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to apologize. I'm trying to read from my phone because I have, different windows up. And so it's a very small device I'm trying to read these off of. But if there is no other further public comment, Mike, was there anybody else?
Nobody has their hand up.
Okay, then we can move on to follow-up questions of the Joint Review Board members. TIF plan. And I guess we can see if any members have new questions, but I'm just wondering if the questions that were left off last time, if they're prepared to answer them. I think we should start there.
If that's okay, yes. Bob Richlicki with K. McKenna. We did have 3 questions. I went over this with the village manager as it related to, looking at the, or listening to the tapes. First, There was a question related to TIF terms that were that we knew of that were less than 23 years. Unfortunately, if you go to the state website and there's Illinois Tax Increment Association, it's really out of date. There were a number of TIFs identified, but it wasn't a comprehensive list. Out of the state list that we saw, TIFs that were less than 23 years, we noted 4, and that was Waukegan Lakehurst Mall, Hillside Business Park, and 2 TIFs in Calumet City, Wentworth TIF and Starline TIF. All of those were less than 15 years. However, the reasons for whether they were cut short because the financing was done or whether they had cut short because the projects were completed or not initiated, unfortunately, we couldn't tell. There also was no data on the city of Chicago. And over the last, I would say, 10 years, the city has been decommissioning several TIFs a year, but we haven't been able to get that data. For Kane McKenna clients, again, we basically had data that was in the last 10 years in our files. The other stuff goes off site. But we identified there were 2 TIFs in Addison, one on Fullerton Avenue that was 6 years, but it was terminated because the project had not been implemented. Army Trail TIF was 18 years because I think they had finished the financing. Blue Island TIF number 1 was cut short after 15 years. Bolingbrook, the industrial TIF there, or what they call IDI, that was done in 15 years. The bonds were retired early because of cash flow. Des Plaines had 2 TIFs, number 2 and 4, which were decommissioned earlier because there were no new projects. Same with Rolling Meadows, that was TIF 3 that was done in 4 years. And Skokie East Prairie, that was less than 20 years because the projects were complete. Oh, and Aurora has recently adopted a TIF at 75th and Ogden, which tied the TIF term of 15 years to its financing. And again, I'm not making any representations that this is a complete list. This was put together from data from our files, which we had for the last 10 years. And then a review of the Illinois Tax Increment Association website, which, like I said, unfortunately, I don't think it's been updated for the last 5 or 7 years. But that's what we have to report on the TIF termination.
And do you know like what sort of percentage that might be? I mean, is that 10% finisher? I mean, is there? I know
no. Yeah,
no?
it's less than 10%. But again, remember, this is not a full list. The city of Chicago, at one point had several hundred TIFs, and they were decommissioning over the years. And again, most of these TIFs that I gave you the information on really have been decommissioned in the last 10 or 12 years. So, there's a whole range of TIFs that we don't have information on because there hasn't really been a central depository in the state to collect this information. This was basically, and I apologize again, this was information that we had from our files.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's understandable.
Thank you.
Do any members have any questions on what was just presented? If not, please move on.
Sure. Then the other question had to do with the finding of infrastructure and adequate utilities. As was noted in the report, the eligibility report, the TIF Act allows for current conditions and prospective conditions in our review of the Act. The review that we had primarily had to do with the developers, engineers, and looking forward over reuses for the TIF. So most of those infrastructure deficiencies had to do with relocation, increase of capacity, movement, coordination of the infrastructure with the proposed redevelopment. However, when we did talk to the village engineer, and this was also part of the infrastructure review that we had sent on that information request that was in there, the 3 current deficiencies as identified by the village had to do with the need for a continuous sidewalk system. This has been a goal of the village, in particular for commercial areas over the last several years. This area still does not have one, so that was a current deficiency. With the onset of the mall or shopping area and residential across the street to Melody Farms. This has necessitated the requirement for coordination and synchronization of the traffic systems on both sides of Milwaukee, and that still has not occurred and is a current deficiency. And tied in with the sidewalk program, or the lack thereof, is also a requirement for improved streetscape along both the perimeter facing 60 and facing Milwaukee, and interior facing the parking lots.
Do any members have any questions? I had a question.
I
Oh,
didn't raise my hand. I'm sorry. I forgot. I will do that in the future. So that continuous sidewalk is one of the reasons that those adjacent areas, I'm just clarifying, is a part of the TIF, correct?
Yeah, and traffic, and there's also, you're
Traffic.
talking about those 3 areas in the southeast, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, that is correct.
and so I have a question about the traffic pattern that you're talking about, because Melody Farms was built after Centennial acquired the property. And so that design isn't necessarily a backdated flaw. That was a flaw that was created. And I don't know why it was created, but that seems to me as an excuse, just as an awkward one. Because like I said, this is something that could have been solved in the construction of Melody Farms. I mean, that's where the deficiency is.
Again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I think what might have happened has to do with the fact that, you engineer things prospectively as best as you can. And this has been our experience with other projects too, where you have a case where there's actual experience, and in many cases, usually it has to do with either more traffic or patterns that were created from traffic signals that IDOT had adjusted, a mile down the road, 2 miles down the road. It's stuff that happens after the original engineering. And I think that might be part of what's happening there. And, but again, we'd have to dig a little deeper. But again, I know that initial engineering is great. It does help in terms of setting out the basic infrastructure, but things do change over time, either in terms of more traffic that came about rather than what was forecast, and other changes. It's all an integrated road system up and down both Milwaukee and Town Line, and any changes could have ripple effects.
And I would say that I hear you, except for, like I said, I think that the deficiency comes into the connections between Melody Farms and the mall, because I mean, everything else has been expanded and upgraded. And so we're looking at something that was newly put in. We're not looking something that was existing deficiency. It was built as a deficiency. So I'm a little confused, but I mean, that's really, I guess, above my pay grade here, and the engineering and the qualifications. That's really not what I'm determining here, but something about that seems a little off. But okay, do any other members have comments on this item? Seeing none, so you can move on to the further.
Sure. And last but not least,
Leanne,
My hand up.
sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm slow on those clicks.
Okay, Hawthorne 73, please go ahead.
Can I just clarify that when you're asking about the utilities, do you mean the traffic signals and the sidewalks? The sidewalk utilities? Just when you're talking about that, I just want to clarify.
yes, and also water, sewer systems, detention, which are part of the future work. So it's a combination. Yeah, we're looking at really anything the public improvement or in the public right away.
Okay.
Okay, please move on. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, and last but not least, we followed up with the management, including the senior vice president or project manager for the mall, and he indicated to us as a follow-up, we passed on the question of the joint review board, and he indicates the following. that currently they have 3 marketing executives devoted full-time to both the revamping as it relates to the mall space and also the 2 vacant department store spaces. All 3, this is their sole assignment as it relates to trying to continue lease up of inline space and to make a determination of what could be reused on the 2 department stores, which vacated in 2017 and 2018 respectively. To date, their advertising budget, since they've acquired those properties, they've incurred about $2 million in terms of direct expenses related with the marketing of those properties, and they budget about $300,000 to $500,000 per year. Now, as I alluded to at the last meeting, a big part of their efforts has to do with contacting networks of brokers. They have done that both through their national networks and also through trade shows, and both regional and national trade shows. They send these 3 marketing people in attendance. And to date, they have discussed about 40 possible transactions. Only one of those transactions in terms of reuse for the 2 big stores. So I just want to be clear that these 40 leads, so to speak, related to the 2 large stores, only one of these had the potential to keep one of the existing stores up. The other 39 would all require demolition and replacement of those properties. To date, their big box efforts have not been successful. None of these transactions have come about to be realized. They also started to look at the ability to try to segment the properties. But again, the expense represented with that segmentation proved to be inefficient. And over the hundreds of conversations that they've they've reported they've had, that has not come to fruition. So the problem, in summary, as they see it, is the users that are out there, tenants that are out there with a large footprint, like the old line Sears, JCPenney's, Macy's, even prior Kmart, let's say. These stores, there's no desire to move into a large space, and their attempts to either try to segment the space or look for other users that could fit that space, non-general merchandise, have not been successful.
Thank you. I believe that it was requested, maybe I'm mistaken. Was there any documentation to verify anything that you've just said?
That's a good question. They do have a list internally of these folks that they've talked to, but because of proprietary information, again, if you look up and down Milwaukee, up and down Town Line, there's dozens, hundreds of retail operations, some small, some large. Information relating to who was contacted, what kind of rates, what kind of terms would be deemed problematic for them to share that. At this point, all they gave us was a summary as it related to what the efforts were over the last 2 or 3 years and an idea of what they had benchmarked. But again, because of proprietary information in a very competitive, and I think everyone understands, we're in a very competitive market now, not just because of the what's happened with COVID, but also with the e-commerce and internet. Their willingness to share data as to exactly who the contacts were is somewhat limited at this time.
I mean, I guess even if it was redacted of who they were, just some sort of documentation that it actually took place could have been helpful. But does anybody have questions? Does anybody else have questions? I thought I remembered asking one question that wasn't quite addressed yet, and it had to do with, some of the roads and pavement in the area that have been in decay, and why an owner of a property had chose to leave them. And you had said you thought it was a cash flow problem. but you couldn't be sure. And so I was wondering if you confirmed that.
No, we haven't. I just want to point out, though, the building condition reports that we had shared with council for the school also included site prep and site review reports. And what that indicates to me is at least many of these issues in terms of what they identified as alligator cracking, cracks in a pavement, et cetera, have been present from 2017 and when these reports were done to current day. And again, usually, as I said, based on our experience with retail and large scale developments, in our experience, what's prohibited ongoing repairs or limited repairs has been, cash flow as it relates to, again, the fact that neither Carson's nor Sears are paying any course, are either taking care of their property directly. And as you saw from some of the vacancy data, the remainder of the mall, the vacancy has increased, and also as a result of that, cash flow has decreased. So that was the basis for our assertion. You don't have two entities that covered almost 15 to 20% of the land area here are no longer pulling their weight, so to speak, and the vacancy in the rest of the mall has increased.
Okay, so just to clarify that, it hasn't been confirmed either way, because I just noticed a lot of cosmetic changes and significant amount of funds dedicated to that maybe could have been used to some of those other needs, but that's okay. Does
Okay.
anybody have any questions?
This is Hawthorne 73, and I
Yes,
forgot
Hawthorne,
to
go ahead.
again. Sorry, I did it again. We don't do that in our Zoom meetings, so I'm out of practice on that. I have Scott Ginsburg, our legal counsel, with us today, and we do have some questions that we'd like Scott to ask.
I will recognize Scott as the Hawthorne representative. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Chairwoman, board members. I do have a couple of questions. Again, I am Scott Ginsburg. I'm legal counsel for Hawthorne School District number 73. We were the ones that requested a number of documents of the village and in pursuance of this continuance so we could further investigate the TIF and provide a recommendation as to whether the TIF should move forward. We reviewed the documents and we appreciate the village providing us several documents in a timely fashion. But it did lead to some questions. Initially, our biggest question is a question regarding information that the village would not provide. And, starting with we received this document. It's a Hawthorne Mall Comprehensive Redevelopment Project description that is prepared by Centennial, dated March of 2019. Within that document, it states that Centennial will be seeking economic development incentives, which will be described in further detail in a supplemental submittal, as well as initial zoning approvals from the village as necessary. Our question is, we requested but did not receive any information regarding the economic incentives that Centennial will receive from the village with these TIF funds. So I'm requesting of the village some information as to exactly what incentive Centennial is going to receive.
Madam Chair, if I may address that for the village.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody has an answer, please go ahead.
Yes, Jim Ferrolo. I am village attorney for the village of Vernon Hills. I want to remind Mr. Ginsburg of the role of this JRB, which he knows full well, is to either approve or reject the proposal before you based on whether or not the eligibility report, the proposed redevelopment project area, and the redevelopment plan and project for the village's Hawthorne Mall TIF district satisfy the plan requirements and the objectives of the TIF Act. That's very clear in the TIF Act. The village provided over 700 pages of documents to Mr. Ginsburg in response to his request, all relating to the documents Kane McKenna looked at to qualify the area. The role of this board is not to assess an economic development package, which, by the way, has not been agreed upon. There are no draft redevelopment agreements, which I've explained to Mr. Ginsburg. And even if there were at this point, that is not the role of this board to assess how the TIF money ultimately will be used to redevelop the area. Your role is much more, it's more 30,000 feet. Does the redevelopment project and plan qualify under the act? So Mr. Ginsburg's question about in terms of incentives that are in negotiation at this point, very frankly, have nothing to do with this proceeding, are really a red herring, and very frankly, something that could not be turned over at this point because there's financial proprietary information that the developer has shared regarding the finances of the mall, the gap analysis, and all the rest. So I would really ask Mr. Ginsburg to focus his questions on documents that relate to the purpose of this JRB, and that is to determine whether or not you're going to give a positive recommendation as to the eligibility report and the redevelopment plan and project, really based on whether or not those documents satisfy the plan requirements and the objectives of the TIF Act. So there are no redevelopment agreements. Any redevelopment agreement that ultimately would be approved would have to be done at a public meeting, I think, as everybody knows, out in the public for comment. That's a long ways off. The terms of negotiations being bantered back and forth really have no role in this proceeding.
And, you know, I don't want this to be a huge back and forth between the two lawyers in the room. But if appropriate, if Mr. Ginsburg would like to say something, I mean, keep it brief. Like I said, we don't need this constant, you know.
Of course. I mean, the purpose of the Joint Review Board is to review the redevelopment plan. Part of the redevelopment plan, and consistent with the purposes of the TIF Act, are to provide incentives to develop the property. I believe the Joint Review Board should know what incentives are being provided. On top of that, if you want to be specific and very legal about it, the redevelopment plan requires an itemized list of TIF costs. And within those TIF costs are going to be incentives provided to the developer. Now, they did provide a list of TIF costs. It's right here. It's $85 million spread out into 8 lines, $10 million for this, $20 million for that. You know, it's very broad. It's not what the TIF Act means when it says provide the TIF costs. We are about 9 weeks away from this TIF being approved, and they'd have a better list of what the costs are going to be. And, you know, it just raises serious red flags that, you know, the village is refusing to provide the costs. And, you know, this redevelopment plan will be executed at some point. It will become publicly available. And the question is, why not make the information publicly available prior to rather than after the execution of the TIF? You know, there is some information that could be provided, and I think as the Joint Review Board, we have a right to know what it is.
Madam Chair, I'd ask you to ask Mr. Ginsburg to keep his comments limited to the statutory role of this body. We are going far afield. The budget that has been provided is a budget that has to be provided. You have an indication of the outside amount of money that can be spent on that TIF. I can tell you this, the budgets are always more than what is spent, because you can't anticipate everything that's needed for a TIF. We are currently in negotiation, and again, I would really be hesitant to introduce any criteria here to this board that isn't part of your statutory obligation for you to consider. Considering, you know, the fact that terms of a redevelopment agreement, which isn't even drafted at this point, haven't been provided, has nothing to do with your decision today. Your decision is a recommendation to the village board on whether or not you agree that the redevelopment project and plan as drafted qualifies for a TIF Act. The school district has really introduced an area that really it just has no role simply in your consideration. Down the line, a redevelopment agreement will be drafted, negotiated, and completed. It will be put up at a public meeting. Public can come in and comment. The districts can comment. It will be fully transparent. But at this time, what's taken place over the last several months, and Mr. Ginsburg knows this because he calls me once a month and we speak, is negotiation. The developer and the village and their financial people, Kane McKenna, and on the developer side have discussed possible plans, and I emphasize possible, and possible terms, but nothing has been agreed upon. And until it is, it's really can't become public. And it's just simply something that's not part of what this board is to consider. So I really would ask you, Ms. Clinton, to keep
Mr.
this.
Ferrillo,
Yes.
I hear what you're saying, but to some extent, if members feel that they need more details to determine whether this qualifies, the uses and the benefits, I think that asking for them, whether they're produced or not, I think that the question of asking for them is not out of line. Everybody here is trying to come to a decision of a recommendation or not. And if they feel that they need more input, I don't see a problem with asking for it. I mean, you certainly don't have to provide it if you don't feel that you're statutorily obligated. But like I said, the back and forth of, debating what the role is. I mean, my role is to, decide whether basically I think this is a good idea. That's the general, whether it qualifies and that could be debated. But even the qualification, I mean, that's really not up to this board either. I mean, that could end up being up to a judge at some point. We don't know. And so trying not to get the debate any further, I would like to move on and see if anybody else has any further questions.
I have several. I have a few more.
Please, if he's going to continue on this line, I'm going to ask that I'd be allowed to address this. I mean, this is something that's not part of what a joint review board.
Mr. Ferrillo, well, and I think that I haven't given you an opportunity to respond, and I don't know what his next line of questioning is. If I feel something is inappropriate, I certainly have no issue stating that. Thus far, I haven't found it to be inappropriate. Again, not a lawyer, but until I know what his next question is, I don't know how I can determine his path or what's appropriate.
And it's obvious the village isn't going to provide this information, so I'm happy to move on from that subject. Same document, it states, with respect to the developer's purchase of the Sears and Carsons, it says Centennial's purchase of the Sears and Carson sites were both defensive and offensive. It was defensive in that Centennial could risk the possibility that they might be sold to a third party whose vision and desire is not aligned with the best interests of the mall. Is anyone able to tell us what exactly that means?
I could tell you what we've seen in other large-scale retail developments. And again, please, I don't want to be facetious, but flea markets, auto storage yards. I'm working in Tinley Park right now where there's a vacant Kmart for the last 2 years. And Kmart, and it's been controversial. They've entered into a lease with a truck trailer company for the front property. And this is right on Harlem in like the heart of their retail area. And then the back part is all for car storage for new cars. I mean, I think that's along the lines of, someone going in for the low hanging fruit, not to the benefit of the mall. And in this case, remember, there's another 1 million feet of users, which were dependent in part on the patronage and the consumer traffic of those two department stores. And their hope, as I understand it, is rather than go for the easy fix, do something that's going to protect the tenants and their investment, because they spend considerable money for both of those facilities, and allow for something that would be quality tied into the rest of the site, and of course, increase the value of the asset. So that's what I think they mean.
Wasn't it true that an undesirable use like a flea market or an auto storage could be prevented by zoning ordinances? And
it may. Again, I could just tell you what I saw, or what you could see if you drive down Harlem, south of 159th.
Do you think the Hawthorne Mall is at risk? The former Carson's facility is at risk of being purchased by a flea market?
Again, you're asking for an example. I just pointed that out. I don't know enough about these 40 or so users that they talked about.
And so, Mr. Ginsburg, I do want you to continue on with the questions you have, but I mean, it's not a trial here. So let's try to limit a little bit of, the back and forth. I think that you're making your point, and I'd like you to continue if you have any further questions.
Sure. Centennial is proposing to demolish the Sears and Carson's, isn't that correct?
Based on market interest to date, I think I reported that they had 40, some interest from 40 different users, and all except one indicated that they could not reuse the special use structures.
I think that the question was, are they going to tear them down, correct? I didn't really hear an answer to that.
That will depend on their financing and on the ultimate deal. We're not there yet. I mean, right now they're both still up.
We touched on this last week, but can you remind us why JCPenney's and Macy's aren't in the TIF? I'd like to understand that now that I've read the documents.
Partly, there's multiple reasons. One, it has to do with the actual ownership. When the village started this in terms of discussions with the owners, those were, again, both under separate ownership, independent of the Centennial land pad, so to speak. So number two was, if there wasn't a direct project associated with that, the idea was, why tie up that equalized assessed valuation at least at this time as part of any TIF. And lastly, I think the idea being, if they were to redevelop, that benefit should accrue to whoever the new developer would be, or current owner, and not to Centennial.
So I have a question to follow up with that. They're currently not available. If they were to become available, like the Sears and the Carsons, does Centennial plan to acquire those properties, and will they seek further incentive to develop them?
I do not know the answer to that question.
Again, incentives to be sought by Centennial in the future really are not part of what you're to consider. The village, it's our role to make sure that the incentive provided ultimately is the right amount of incentive. We will assess what they've asked for and determine, but for a level of incentive, development would not proceed. That's what's happening, Madam Chairman. The village has that role. They respect that role, and will conduct that role in a very responsible manner. But regarding questions regarding future incentives to be asked about, I think we're taking this body down a path.
Mr. Ferrillo,
not part of the record.
Mr. Ferrillo, being one of maybe 2 elected officials here on this panel, and having a responsibility to my constituents, evaluating things to make sure that this TIF, which is a great incentive, and I actually believe that incentives do need to happen for development, but just not setting a standard and making sure that they're not being abused, and as just the developer getting subsidizing private development with potential public tax dollars. So I disagree with you that the fact that this doesn't involve those things, because I'm concerned here that Vernon Hills is making this a pattern, and that further development down the road will not happen without this, and pigeonholing themselves to that without finding a compromise where all entities benefit. So I have a responsibility to the people I represent to, beyond this, when I have to vote to raise the levy on their taxes because there's no new revenue coming in, that I'm making sure we're not building a pattern here. So yeah. I do disagree with you.
Okay, respectfully, you're introducing subject matter that has no role in what this JRB is to consider. And the Village of Vernon Hills has a very significant responsibility to administer TIF funds responsibly and not to give more than what's needed. And that assessment is being made by the financial people as we speak. So we take that role seriously. They've done it for years and years, and it takes a long time to get to the right level of incentive and to determine what, but for but for what amount would be needed for development to occur. So again, your role, of course, is to your constituents, but I'd ask you to consider your role here today and everybody else's, which is to determine whether or not the redevelopment project and plan complies with the act. It's a very straightforward proceeding we're having here, and we're introducing quite a bit more than the statute calls for.
Mr. Orlo, with all due respect, you're filibustering here, and you're taking up all the room, and we're here to inquire as to some specific questions. This is our one opportunity to ask these questions, and we ask you, at least you please let me ask my questions. The village is going to have, all the time in the world after this to do whatever it's going to do, but this is our opportunity, and you'll have your chance to talk. But can we please just stop with the lengthy responses to questions that aren't asked of you?
I'd ask you to please stop Mr. Ginsburg from turning this into cross-examination. It is a very unusual proceeding to have the attorney here.
Mr. Ferrillo, I already did ask Mr. Ginsburg to stop the cross-examination. I actually did already address that fact. And so I would like him to continue if he has any further questions. But yes, I have already addressed the fact of, yes, I agree it looks like a little bit of a cross-examination, and that is not what we are here for. That has been addressed. Thank you.
I can tell you this, having a lawyer ask questions at a JRB of the TIF financial consultant is not a very common proceeding.
It may not be common, but if Hawthorne wants to defer their representative and now make it Mr. Ginsburg, I mean, I guess that's their choice. Do you have any further questions? Anybody from the panel?
Are there any documents that Centennial or anyone can show to demonstrate efforts to market the property or release the property, the box stores, besides the summary provided by Centennial that we discussed earlier?
Sorry, the summary is what we have at this point. To the extent that there would be additional data, when I had went over this with them earlier in the week, they had indicated that the kind of granular stuff that you're referring to in terms of we spoke with so-and-so on this date is, again, internal and proprietary. And to me, again, I thought, and it's just me, and this is not, I'm not speaking for the village or the rest of the Joint Review Board members, but I think the fact that over or near $2 million has been spent. They've got 3 full-time brokers working on this, and I think I alluded to this at the last JRB meeting. Kane McKenna has worked on several of these enclosed mall projects over the years, or are familiar with them. And in many of the cases, for example, in Yorktown, the old Montgomery Ward building, they could not find a reuse for it. That was knocked down. It was part of a business district and incentives. And what you all see there is the lifestyle center that's there, H&M, Forever 21, a bunch of restaurants. That replaced what you saw. And in another project we worked on in West Dundee and Carpentersville, Spring Hill Mall, again, the old Wards was coming down in order to make way for an entertainment center. So, the marketing efforts for these, and in this case, you're really talking about a 40-year-old building, a special use designed for one use only, a department store, have been very difficult to fill. I think, the hope would be, the home run is that you get somebody to re-tenant it. And the problem here is, given the footprint, in one case over 200,000 feet, in the other case over 170,000 feet. I think with the exception of what we're seeing in the Market Woodman's is probably the only one who gets close to that. It's very hard to find a user of that size.
Just one last question. Prior to the Sears and Carson's vacancy, the mall, according to documents provided, had occupancy rates of 94% and 92.8%. Do you agree with me that that's one of the highest occupancy rates of any mall, neighborhood mall in the region?
At that time, I would say that's about normal. I think I also mentioned as part of the record and that a typical vacancy rate is about 5 to 10%. Now, I have to tell you right now, if you had a 92% occupancy rate today, that would be amongst the highest. But at that time, that was kind of an acceptable rate. And of course, you saw with the closure of the anchors and then the ripple effect, that's increased. But from a commercial real estate standpoint, you would usually program anywhere from 5 to maybe at the outside 10%, but you'd put it as an acceptable loss level of 5 to 10% vacancy. That would be considered normal.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Do any other panel members have any questions? We can move on.
I had my hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Cirillo, please go ahead.
Yeah, Bob, can you tell me if the proposed TIF is going to be similar as far as occupancy to the Melody Farms?
That's a good question. Can I answer that in two parts? Generally,
how about
yes.
Specifically to the occupancy or the district, the school districts, what they're going to potentially have put into them as a result of students?
Okay, I could answer. I think, given the location of both where Melody is and on the other side on Hawthorne, you're looking at a certain type of demographic. Smaller units, higher rent per square foot, partly because they're small, partly because of the amenities that have to be there. So as a result, from a demographic standpoint, these are really not, in our opinion, or I think in any of the review that we've had, our school-age children generators. So that's where you're getting at.
I'm trying to draw a comparison from Melody Farms and the students that occupy those units as being overburdening for District 73 compared to what is proposed in the TIF, and then going back and asking Mr. Ginsburg if we know what those numbers are of the students that occupy District 73.
So I think the short answer is, yeah, they're going to be at least this part of the market, they're going to be similar products in terms of size, kind of amenities, that kind of thing.
And Mr. Ginsburg, do you know the amount of students that actually go to District 73 who occupy Melody Farms?
I do not.
I
do not.
So, Mr. Cirillo, you actually just sparked something in my brain, something that isn't reflective of the amount of students currently at Melody Farms. But I do know that because people love our area and are happy here, that they have moved out of other neighborhoods, downsized perhaps, live in Melody Farms, and then they might downsize and then move into the mall. And so we might see indirectly an influx of students that they're not directly from there. And I mean, that just sparked.
But I think we probably have the actual numbers of how many students for Melody Farms. I'm just trying to, for my own understanding, see what type of an impact, if we're going to compare apples to apples, and if the number is, that from Melody Farms that are impacting District 73, 300 extra students, or if it's less than 10 or 5 from what I hear.
Yeah, I don't have that number, but again, like I said,
Does anyone else have that? Does anyone else have that number?
It doesn't look like anybody does offhand, but again, I think that indirectly, even if they're not moving right in, we could see a potential growth of students, since you mentioned it, that of people who currently own homes and want to downsize and want to stay in the area, so move to those things, and then people will be moving into their homes with children. And so indirectly, I think that there could be.
But directly for the TIF area, I don't see that as an area that's going to be bringing in grammar school kids for that TIF project. And just you drawing the comparison from Melody Farms, that I believe it would be under 10 currently.
Julie, I have my hand raised.
Oh, okay, Mark, go ahead.
Oh, I see everybody's hands now. We'll start with, I see Prentice before you, so we'll go with him, and then we'll go with Village Manager Fleshauer.
Prentice Lake Community High School District 128. Both the districts have done demographic surveys that are updated. And, you know, as far as the high school with the demographics, we built Melody Farms into our estimates before it was built. Minimal number of students for the high school district. I can't speak directly to 73, and perhaps one of those folks could, but we use the same demographer. He built those assumptions into our demographic reports, which we're generally updating once or twice a year, given the growth in the south end of the district in Vernon Hills. So I would say for us, the impact is minimal.
Doc, can you just give me a small guess of what minimal means?
Well, Rich, I can't off the top of my head.
Okay.
The number that you use, 300, is not even in the stratosphere with that. It would be much, much lower than that.
Mark?
Dr. Lee, I mean, are we talking 5, 10, 50? I mean, is there any gauge that you can?
I would say, Dan, you can jump in here, but I would say probably, you know, less than 50 for sure.
Oh, I don't actually know, but I would be very surprised if it was more than 10. It could be more than 10, but
it's pretty tiny.
I think there's very few, at least at the high school level. So we're not 73, we're the high school district, so grades 9 through 12. I don't think we have many high school students from Melody Farms.
Mark, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, the numbers that were provided to us by District 73 was a total of 7 students at the Atworth, 2 of which were high school, 5 of which were grade school. And it was stated that 2 of those were students that were already enrolled in classes. In District 73, they were, parents had moved.
Okay. So just trying to draw the comparison with Bob's, since Bob's available, if my logic shows appropriate, if we're comparing the 2 areas, we could identify a minimal impact or a consistent impact that we saw at Melody Farms as far as for students in the districts.
The only thing I would like to add to that would be that under the TIF Act, and also included in the village's TIF plan, is the ability for each of the districts to realize TIF increment. They could get TIF increment before the expiration of the TIF, with the express purpose of being for education of new students. So, you know, there are statutory formulas set up in the TIF Act, but the amount is recognized, it's put into the budget. I think it's up to 27% of residential increment available to 73 for the education of new students, and up to 13% of said increment would be available to 128, again, for the education of students.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have anything to add? I still see Village Manager Fleshauer's hand up, but I'm assuming that was from before.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought someone else would lower it for me.
Yeah, I had to do that. So I think who's ever running the technical portion of the meeting.
Yeah, duct tape works too.
All right, so if there is no further questions, we can move on to consideration of a recommendation to approve or disapprove the redevelopment plan and project for the Hawthorne Mall redevelopment project area. And I would like to open the floor to members if they have any statements or concerns or whatever. Jeff, go ahead, please. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I think as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, you know, I supported just the continuance of the meeting because I know there were some of the members here that were present that, you know, didn't have a chance to review all the documents or get with their respective boards and vet this thing appropriately. So I would hope at this time everybody has had that opportunity to do that. And for me, at this point, I'd like to make a motion to approve the redevelopment plan and the redevelopment project area in relation to the Hawthorne Mall TIF, and direct our chairperson to sign and provide a recommendation to the village board.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion? I don't see any hands right now, so I'm just going to say a couple things in regards to the motion before we vote. You know, again, being one of maybe 2 elected officials here and one of 2, I believe, residents of Vernon Hills, and you know, paying attention and listening to everybody around and what we're actually here to do. You know, the but for, I guess, wasn't overly convincing for me. I'll just say that. You know, we have a developer that's been here and put millions of dollars in already. I certainly believe that there is some level of incentive that needs to be provided. I guess that where I am is I'm not so sure that there wasn't, you know, a better compromise to where our levying bodies could be seeing something, some return, rather than waiting for 23 years. And again, every time that I have to go in and vote for a referendum for our schools, every time that I have to, you know, vote to raise a levy in order to keep services and sustain them that we have, you know, this is hard for me. You know, in a way, voting no is saying, hey, we're good with the revenue we have. We don't need any more. We're willing to sacrifice that. And so that's where I'm lying here, and that's where it's difficult. And again, I certainly want Hawthorne to be redeveloped. I do believe that there is incentive that need to be offered. I just feel we're getting in a habit of giving away the farm. And I'm not sure that in the long run, that is in the best interest of our tax-paying residents in our current businesses who are here. And so,
Julie, could I just ask you one question? I know that we were waiting for an answer that you were going to bring this back to the board. Did you get any direction or information from them on what that meant?
Yeah, so right now we're working on, you know, drafting a policy. Currently, we're going with the current procedure, which is that the county receives the packet. They give the materials to the board member, and the board member is left to their own devices. But I also want to clarify that I have spoken with several board members. Even prior to the last meeting, I did meet with county staff. And so I'm really actually just not out here on my own. I did have those discussions and do that due diligence. And if I had heard any really counter to what my opinion might be today, that I certainly would have reevaluated and considered that in my decision making.
Was it any different than the Buffalo Grove TIF, or how was it different than that? I think that the county board or that there was an approval for.
I do know that the county board member met with several different entities, and there was there was zero opposition. I mean, you know, I am aware that, you know, last night.
Oh,
I just lost her.
sorry. Yeah.
Mike, did we lose her? Mike Storto.
I don't see her name listed anymore.
And it looks like we did.
Maybe she'll jump on as an attendee again, and I'll bring her in if I see it.
While we're waiting, things from Vernon Hills, I think we have 0 kids in Melody Farms right now. We used to have 2, but not anymore.
So this is Kathleen O'Connor from Libertyville Township. I know County Board Member Simpson has made comments about elected officials, and I did contact all of our board members, and everyone is in support at Libertyville Township of this TIF district. And the one thing I do want to say is I think that we have to recognize these municipalities are in a difficult position, and there's a lot of areas that have been negatively impacted by, you know, the economics of this current situation. And I do applaud them for trying to partner with the private sector in terms of looking at these redevelopment issues. And it is a shared sacrifice. And I think that realizing to Mr. Ferrello's point is the scope of our responsibility is limited, and there are answers that we'll want moving forward or that the village will provide moving forward, but it clearly they've demonstrated that it does meet the qualifications of a TIF district. And I do thank them for pulling together as much information as they have so that we're able to share it with other elected officials.
Thank you. For the group, I just heard from Julie and she's trying to call back in, so she'll be with us shortly.
Since Julie and Katie both shared their board's position, our board has quite the opposite, thinking in Hawthorne 73, and I do not have, how my vote will go. Will not be able to vote in favor of the motion that Jeff has on the floor, as our board is concerned on the financial impact of the school district at this time. And they're not as sure that it does meet the TIF requirements. Well, we're still looking into that.
All right.
I want to apologize for my computer dying. If I can kind of jump back in and see where we are at the moment. I had missed what Leanne just did.
So
You already voted. Crazy.
We basically, Julie, this is Jeff. Catherine made a statement and so did Leanne, and now it's back to you.
Yeah, so I just finished up answering Mr. Cirillo's question. And again, something that's come into play with my decision making is what I've heard from community members that reached out to me. I don't know if anybody else had people reach out, but I've had several people saying that, they would have hoped to see something that was more of a compromise rather than the increment being maxed out and the years being maxed out. And so, my vote isn't necessarily reflective of the fact that I don't believe some sort of incentives need to be offered for this development to happen. I'm actually very supportive of that. My vote is more reflective of, looking towards this redevelopment and the future as, not setting a standard that this is, that you don't have to contribute to the levying bodies to develop here. And so if anybody else can take a look, I don't see any other hands raised. Does anybody else have anything to add? So I guess that we will move to a roll call vote.
Vernon Hills Park District.
Yes.
Countryside Fire Protection District.
Yes.
Libertyville Township.
Yes.
Village of Vernon Hills.
Yes.
Community member.
Yes.
College of Lake County.
Yes.
Libertyville High School.
Yes.
Hawthorne Consolidated School District.
No.
County of Lake.
No.
Cook Memorial District.
Abstain.
It looks like the motion carries. We can move on to next steps, I believe.
That's correct. Bob, you want to hit
Sure.
the highlights of the timetable, the next steps?
Sure, thank you. At this juncture, we're about midway through. I think there's several representatives have indicated you're aware of the, and the public as well, the October 6th public hearing, which will be at Village Hall. And no action will be taken that night. It is primarily to get input from not only the general public, but also the taxing districts are more than welcome to come in front of the village board and indicate what their concerns or recommendations are regarding the TIF. We also have another set of notices that would go to all the taxpayers of record in the TIF that will be taken care of in the next 2 weeks or so. And then the village will publish in newspaper general circulation 2 legal notices regarding the October 6th meeting. And again, October 6th, no action will be taken. It's primarily to get input from the various stakeholders in this endeavor. And according to state law, the village, then once the public hearing is closed, once it's closed, they have to wait 14 days, but no more than 90 to consider those 3 TIF ordinances that Mr. Ferrello had shared with the board at the last meeting. So that's really the overview in terms of where we are in the process.
Do any members have any questions on where we're going next? Seeing none, I just want to say one more thing that, you know, obviously this is advisory and the village has the ultimate decision no matter what comes out of the JRB. But this is going to end up in the court of public opinion, and it's slowly been flowing in. Like I said, I know I've gotten a lot of outreach from residents in the area and concern. And I just implore the village that if there is some sort of compromise here that can be made, so the benefit can be shared and not have to wait for 23 years, that's investigated. And if no other members have comments, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Vernon Hills Park District, so moved.
Libertyville Township, a second.
And can we get a roll call, please?
Hills Park District,
Yes.
Countryside Fire Protection District,
Yes.
Libertyville Township,
Yes.
Village of Vernon Hills,
Yes.
community member,
Yes.
College of Lake County,
Yes.
Libertyville High School,
Yes.
Hawthorne Consolidated School District,
Yes.
County of Lake.
Yes, I just want to thank everybody for their participation and efforts, and we are adjourned.
Thank you. And on behalf of the Village of Vernon Hills, I just want to thank everyone as well for your time, energy, effort, and for sharing your expertise with this group. Thank you very much.
Thank you.